It's time for the Double Stop with Brian Sword. Welcome to the Double Stop. I'm Brian Sword. This week, I have part 2 of my conversation with Michael Thompson. You may not have heard the name, but he is a session guitarist who has played with everybody from Michael Jackson to Shania Twain to Animal Logic with Stanley Clarke and Stuart Copeland. In this half of the conversation, we dig deeper into his session career. I found it to be a fascinating look at one of the most in-demand session players going. So let's jump right in. Here is my conversation with Michael Thompson.
Lange was the name of the band, and we worked on tunes, and Win was right there, you know, when we write a new tune, right there, you know, ready to record it, and so we ended up having like, you know, 8 or 9 tunes that were mastered, you know, that were done up. Again, it's like, you know, if it were today, we would have just released the album, but of course we were trying to get the big record deal, and you know, so we were doing showcases and that whole frustrating thing, and you know, that was like, it was frustrating because it was like, you know, you do the showcase and then you hear like Ron Fair passed on the band, you know, it's like, oh, I guess we suck, you know, and that kind of disheartening whole thing. And it's funny that when we did get a record deal on Geffen, so Billy ended up getting offered this gig with this guy, Peter something, that the guy that produced Men at Work, I forget what his last name was, but he was like the hot guy for a minute, and he put together this project called The City or something, and Billy ended up getting offered that as singer, so he did that. And I had been hearing about this guy named Moon Calhoun, and I had actually met Moon. He was a singer and a drummer, a great one. He had been in Rufus as a drummer, and actually the Gap Band as a drummer. White guy, but super soulful, and so we needed a singer, and so that's when I started working with Moon, and we started doing gigs around town, again, showcases and stuff. There was some interest, but never enough to actually get an offer. And this guy, Alan Niven, who managed a band called Great White.
Mm-hmm. Guns N' Roses too, I think. Yeah,
but this was prior to Guns N' Roses. He had Great White, and he also did all their recording at Total Access. So there was kind of like a sort of like a, you know, family of people that worked down at that studio in the early years and stuff, and so I knew the Great White guys by way of you know, working down at Wynn's, and I knew Alan, English guy, and he really liked my tunes and liked our project and liked our demos and stuff, and he kind of take me out to dinner or something, and prior to him getting the Guns N' Roses thing, and so, you know, nice enough guy, and I was you know, felt okay about him or whatever, but then, like, his wife was Tom Zutat's secretary at Geffen, and when Tom signed Guns N' Roses, they had some woman managing them that was like the first thing to go, you know, and so they got rid of the woman, and Tom Zutat placed Alan in as their manager. And they weren't even, I guess they weren't even like caring enough then, like who their manager was or whatever, but Alan went from being just this struggling manager of Great White, and of course that was before Great White's, you know, success, to being like this powerful guy who managed Guns N' Roses, you know, and so I remember, like, after all those years of showcases and getting passed on and everything, like, Alan said, well, I've got 2 offers for you. One is with Geffen, and one is with Atlantic. Which one do you prefer? You know, I'm like, oh, this is a bitch, man. And at that point, we didn't even, it was just Moon and I. We had a gigging band, and the other couple of guys in the band didn't really dig Alan, and we had started working with it. He said he wanted to be our manager, blah, blah, blah. So we said, okay, let's do it. And so Geffen was the hip label, and I mean, Atlantic was too, but that's how we got a record deal. No showcase, no audition, just Alan got us a deal.
Did the slang material play a part of that?
Yeah, although, I mean, I think Tom Zutaut and Alan, and, you know, Alan's wife working for Tom and stuff, they were so in bed together. I don't even know if, like, Tom, no, wrong about that. Tom had heard our stuff, and he had seen us live, and it was one of those things where it was, like, just on the tip of him signing us, but it never enough to push him over the edge. And then Alan, being Guns N' Roses manager, I guess finally it was enough to actually get a deal. But
yeah, you finally had a champion, big
time. Yeah. And you know, that was the good news, which was great news. I mean, getting that deal and getting the chance to do the record. The sort of the bad news part of it for me and Moon was that, well, Wynn was partners with Alan Niven at that point. They had a thing called Stravinsky Brothers that was a partnership. Wynn was, you know, full partner with Alan, and Alan ended up nixing Wynn in kind of a dirty deal thing. And the bad news part of the whole thing was that Alan was the producer along with Wynn, which I felt great about Wynn because he's a great producer and we'd been working together for years. But Alan was kind of the iron-fisted producer of the album, and to this day it really irks me that the changes he made in, like, he changed the lyrics to like a few of the songs a lot, and he had this thing about he wanted to co-write the lyrics on a couple of the tunes, but he wasn't going to take, he wanted the credit, but he wasn't going to take like a piece of the tune kind of thing. And the first song on the album is a song called Secret Information that was one of our favorite tracks, and you know, it had kind of, I mean, it wasn't any life-changing lyrics or anything, but it had good lyrics that worked. Alan, like, when I hear that tune now, damn near every other line he ended up rewriting to something that was not as good as what we had. And so anyway, it was that kind of vibe, and it was sort of like, you know, threatening to make the deal go away kind of thing.
Oh, yeah.
Where, you know, you had that sort of hanging over your head. It wasn't like a, you know, real mutual feeling good about it kind of thing. And so, I mean, he had basic good gut kind of instincts that weren't all horrible, but he was, you know, he was no Mutt Lange.
Yeah.
And he was and he became kind of a tyrant too. I mean, he went from this sort of gentlemanly English guy, which what I knew of him, I hadn't really spent any time with him, to like this really kind of, you know, maniacal, you know, iron-fisted sort of like, this is how it's going to be kind of thing. And I guess, you know, Wynn had his troubles with him too further down the road. But yeah, so the upshot of that whole thing was, and so also with that Geffen release, I wrote a tune called Can't Miss with this great songwriter, this guy Mark Spiro, who I had been writing with. I had started writing with him like regularly, and we actually had a couple of big near misses, like Heart cut one of our tune when they're really big. They cut one of our songs, and it was going to be their single, and like at the last minute, our song was called Cruel Tears, and Diane Warren, they cut a tune called Cruel Nights on the same album, and our song went from like, it was going to be a single to it became like a European B-side or something. And then we cut this tune that David Lee Roth was going to have his single, and and then we cut this tune that, or we wrote this song called Affection, that the guy Mike Reno, another Canadian.
Yeah, Loverboy. Yeah.
Mikey Reno, who, Loverboy had still been hot, and he was doing his solo album. This was like 89. And so we went in and cut this whole Mike Reno solo album, and the label ended up not wanting to know about a Mike Reno solo album, and he ended up releasing the tune. I just found out, through, Lee Sklar posted it. Mike Reno ended up releasing it just in recent years, that tune. But for a minute there, it looked like this guy Mark Sparrow and I had a good thing going with writing tunes for these different bands and stuff. And so anyway, we wrote this song called Can't Miss, and it was on the MTV album, and it kind of took off at rock radio. It became number one played tune for 3 weeks in a row on the R&R chart and stuff, and that we were all thrilled, thinking we were on our way, and but our actual single was this ballad called Give Love a Chance that I wrote with, or no, I didn't co-write it at all. That guy Jeff Paris wrote with, I forget who he wrote it with, but it was a great tune, sort of a Foreigner kind of tune, and we did a video for it with we did the video with this guy Nigel Dick, who had done all Guns N' Roses video, and top notch thing, and man, and a couple of months went by, it never got released, and we're like, what the hell, and it turned out sort of way down the line, finding out that the people at Geffen didn't dig Alan Niven, because he stomped in there and started barking orders and just had that attitude. So they squashed our album, and it was nothing. It was nothing against Moon and I. It was they didn't dig Alan Niven. Oh, the other thing is he kept us from the. I went up there a total of one time to Geffen. It was when that tune Can't Miss was on the charts, and we went up there and met some of the A&R people and got patted on the back and stuff, and that was it. And so that, for whatever it's worth, the actual single that was gonna put us out there and stuff never did get released, and it became this sort of one of those albums that the European AOR fan kind of people, a lot of people loved that record, and I still like it. It was a good record, but so anyway, that was the MTV experience.
After that kind of ending to it, how easy was that, for you to dust yourself off and get back to it, or was it, rather crushing? You know what?
I had, my studio career was going along swimmingly at that point, and I actually wasn't, I was ready to walk away from it because I didn't dig working with Alan, and so was Moon. He didn't. We didn't want to do another record with him, even if there had been one offered and stuff. So I loved the whole experience of releasing an album, and I have a picture of me Tower Records on Sunset when the album came out. They used to put up these giant sort of, I guess they were along the side of the building promoting the albums, the new releases, and ours was right next to the front door kind of thing, and so we got the minute right there and stuff, but I, after the whole experience, I was busy doing sessions and stuff, and so it was kind of a side, and Alan knew that too, that we weren't going to be this touring band, like Great White or something, it was kind of a studio project.
Right. And how did you get Pat Torpy involved in that one?
He was in the band when we were doing our demos. He actually played on that tune I was telling you about, Secret Information. That was one of Pat's favorite tracks that he had played on through the years. And I thought he was the greatest. We were actually, he wasn't in the band when we got the deal, but a couple of years before that, he had been in the actual gigging Slang band.
Now, when that band kind of dissolves, you said your session career was hopping. At what point
Yeah.
does Animal Logic come in?
It was actually right at the same time as the release of the MTV album, because I had just started doing that Animal Logic album, and Stuart Copeland went in that same Tower Records on Sunset and very loudly said, "I want the Michael Thompson Band album. Have you got the Michael Thompson Band album?" And I thought that was just the greatest. He told
awesome.
me that he did that, and it's like, wow, that's too cool.
That's a good dude.
Yeah, that Animal Logic is another one of my tangent stories.
Bring it.
Well, it was just another fluky thing where, back to the 6 Degrees of that guy Trey Thompson, who was the bass player in Joe Cocker, the first thing I did here. That guy Tony Berg that he turned me on to, I did the band Romance with him. He had a friend named Debbie Holland who, a few years after, mid-'80s or whatever, she called me to play in this bar band that was literally like playing. We played at this place, Brennan's in Manhattan Beach, for drunken surfers, just cover tunes, And she was a singer and stuff. And, and like, then, a couple of years later, I hear that Debbie Holland is singing in a band with Stuart Copeland and Stanley Clark, and I'm like, no way, not the same Debbie Holland that I know. And sure enough, Stanley and Stuart were looking for a singer-songwriter to build a project around, and they were listening to a bunch of tunes, and she was a good songwriter, and they liked her tunes, and so that's how she ended up working with them. And Andy Summers was originally the guitar player on the thing, and and Debbie called me and said, this Andy might bail on this thing because he had some other stuff going on, and I don't know how into it he was or whatever, but she said, I've told them about you, and you might get the call, kind of thing. And like a few weeks went by, and I didn't, and I kind of had forgotten about it, and then I just happened to be home on a Sunday afternoon, and I get a call from Ocean Way Studio, and they're like sitting around the studio waiting for Joe Walsh to show up, who, when Andy bailed, they decided to, like Miles Copeland was managing the project, and Miles's idea was to use like a famous guitarist on it, kind of like on every tune, get a different guy, have like Jeff Beck on one song and Peter Frampton on a song and Joe Walsh on a song and that kind of Steve Howe and stuff like that. And but Stuart was way more into like finding a guy, and he really dug the idea of like this unknown guy, me, and not like a big, corporate rock name guy and stuff. And so anyway, I went in to the studio, and I remember like, I didn't have what's called cartage then, where someone else brings your gear. I hadn't quite worked my way up to that. And so I had my little station wagon full of my gear, and I get to the studio, and I'm like all sweaty, moving my stuff in, and Stanley's standing there, and Stuart's standing there, and Miles Copeland's standing there, and they're all kind of like giving me the like, let's see what you can do, kid, kind of thing, And fortunately, the only guy I knew was the engineer, this guy Chubba, who just passed away this year, great engineer. And so I had a little bit of like, oh, this guy knows me kind of thing. But so I went in, and they put up this song, Spy in the House of Love, and it just had like Stuart's drums, Stanley's bass, Debbie's vocal and like a little keyboard pad, and there was all this room to like totally, as it turns out, there was all this room to like forge a sound for the album. And I was just like, going on the sheer adrenaline of being A, the biggest Police fan, B, the biggest Stanley Clarke fan. And, like, I remember, like, man, I'm thinking, is this rock or is it sort of, it had like a country-ish kind of sound and stuff. And Debbie said, like, think James Burton on acid, and it just sort of like crystallized, like, yeah, like kind of clean Strat, but aggressive and blah, blah, blah. So I started playing, and I started seeing some sort of nods, like they're digging this, kind of thing. So I threw down a bunch of parts on that tune and did a solo, and they really liked it. And Stuart said, great, what are you doing tomorrow? And so that's how that started. But it was another one of those just happened to be home. Really, I mean, that was like really just happened to be home, because like if they had gone on to the next guy or someone else, or if Joe Walsh had showed up, I never would. He just spaced it. They had asked Joe Walsh to do it, and he was in. It turned out he was in Memphis, so he wasn't even in town, and but that's how it happened for me. A couple of big times like that where I was here, I was available, I was, there, ready, willing, and able, and so that turned into a really great thing too. Not so much, well, being on that record, and even though it was a small record as far as it never sold a lot and stuff, but it was sort of like a critical favorite record, and Stanley and Stuart both ended up composing music for a bunch of films that they ended up using me on through the 90s and the early 2000s. Stuart, when they did that last Police tour, he made so much money, he didn't want to deal with directors anymore and stuff. But Stuart always sort of had like a movie that he was working on that would be, they weren't A movies, they were kind of B movies, but they still, paid well, and it was, a lot of it was just, I'd be like the only guy. It'd be me, and there was a guy named Judd Miller, great Iwi player. He's a horn player, but he had this Iwi dealio that had all these samples and stuff. So between me playing on it and him playing on it, Stuart could do these whole scores, And then with Stanley, we did some cool movies too. The best one for me was getting to do all the guitar underscore stuff on that Tina Turner movie.
Oh, right.
What's Love got to do with it? There's some cool like cues and that stuff.
Now, the Animal Logic one, I'm a big fan of that record, and it's a really interesting one because there's a ton of guitar playing on that record. But, you're not a band member, but you're in there, all guitar by Michael Thompson. So it's a weird dynamic because I remember when I got it, I was like, who is this? And I looked it up, and it was so shocking to have such a prominent instrument, but you're not actually a member. Yeah.
I mean, it was flattering that after I had done like about 5 or 6 tunes on that, Stuart asked me if I wanted to be a member. And that's, like I said, literally the week that the MTV album came out. And so I was like, man, I got to regretfully decline,
Right.
Because I had my own project, and he totally understood.
And I recall seeing those guys on, I'm going to say Letterman, but it was definitely one of them, Leno or Letterman or Arsenio Hall or something. Did you play out?
Yeah,
Did you do that? No?
No, they had, after I did a short, like a 3-week tour of Europe with them, that there's some clips that's online and stuff of that. It was okay. And then we did like a short West Coast tour, And then they did like a U.S. tour that Rusty Anderson played guitar. He was a friend of Debbie's, you know, the guy that plays with McCartney.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, Rusty, and he looked a lot like me. We had our hair almost exactly the same, and someone sent me a picture on Facebook or something of Rusty with Animal Logic, and I'm going, wow, because it was like from the side and his hair was hanging down. I'm like, damn, I don't even remember that gig, you know, and it turned out it wasn't me, but it fooled me at first. But anyway, I think one of those TV shows, Ray Gomez played guitar, who Stanley had, used to be Stanley's guitar player and stuff. So I never ended up doing any of the TV shows, or but my little stint with them was a 3-week tour and recording the album.
And for the follow-up, how involved were you in that one?
That one was more piecemeal. It was like the first one had a vibe, and I was coming in and playing on the tracks, and we were tracking together as a band and stuff. And even though there's a couple other guitar players on that first one doing some other tunes, but the second one, it's funny because that guy Tony Berg, who is how I met Debbie, and is the guy that I met that got me in that band called Romance. Tony ended up producing some of that second album from being a friend. Because Tony was like an A&R guy at Geffen for a bunch of years. And anyway, the second one to me didn't, I don't think I ever ended up hearing the whole album or something, but it was more piecemeal. I came in and played on a few tunes, but it wasn't the same vibe as that first one. The first one felt a lot more like a band kind of thing.
Yeah, and it sounded that way. And the first one may not have set the world on fire, but it did okay. I think the second one came and went pretty quick, and that was the end of it.
Yeah. Yeah, so it was a thing, but it was a really nice feather in my cap, because the Police were only a couple of years out of, you know, they'd only broken up a couple of years before that, and so it was like, you know, I remember other musicians were finding out that I did this, that I was playing with Stuart Copeland, you know, and it was like, whoa! It was huge to me, and it was huge to some other people, so it was like a really nice kind of one of those fluky, you know, gigs that like I said, I got it from doing a bar gig with Debbie Holland, you know.
You never know how it's going to work out. It's funny, all these people you meet along the way.
Yeah.
Now, it seems after this Animal Logic, that's when, again, your session playing seemed to go up another notch. Is that fair to say? Yeah.
The first really big hit that I got to play on was that Michael Bolton, When a Man Loves a Woman.
Which was massive when that came out.
It was massive, and that was another one of those, just happened to be home. I mean, I had been recommended to this, there was a woman who co-produced that song, who Michael ended up getting in like a disagreement with her or something, and her name got taken off it. But she was a big New York jingle, she had a jingle company that was huge in New York. Her name was Susan Hamilton, and she had moved to LA. She wanted to be a record producer, and she had produced, like, she had an agreement with Michael that she would get to produce one song on every album, like a cover tune. I think she had done like the cover on the album before it. I don't know if it was Georgia or Dock of the Bay or something like that, but yeah, so I got a call from her, and I had never worked with her, but someone had recommended me. I had at that point started doing enough stuff where, you know, my name was in the mix, you know, and yeah, so that was like, you know, it was so cool for me because Jeff Porcaro was playing drums, and I had met Jeff before that. I had done a couple of studio things with him, project, great guy, and I was such a fan of his and stuff. But yeah, I remember it just sort of like, you know, of course everyone's familiar with When a Man Loves a Woman, the song, you know, and we were tracking it in the studio, and I heard Michael's voice, and it's just like, broke out in goosebumps kind of thing, And but just that lick, it's like on a record, on a session, you just play what comes to you, and you're not thinking, wow, this could be a part that for like the next 25 years a guitar player is going to have to learn this thing note for note. But that down, the thing I played on that intro ended up being one of those little things, one of those parts.
And that's, for session players, like, that's such an interesting to wrap your head around, is you're walking into a studio, a very high-pressure situation, probably never heard the song before. You're going to hear it, and you're going to come up with parts instantly. Like, that's a lot of pressure to try not to buckle under.
It is, and like, when you think about it in terms like that, you go, wow. But, like, when you're just doing it, it's what you do, and you get, from getting a chance to do it a bunch, which I got a chance to do, I got better and better at it, I think, but but that was the beginning of, like, being on a massive #1 song. And I had started working with David Foster, but hadn't had the big hit yet. We had done only a couple of little things. There was that initial session in '88, and then a year went by and I didn't hear from him because he wasn't doing a lot of stuff. It was like, I never realized it, but like after the early '80s and the Chicago success, David got cold for like 3 or 4 years, which like he couldn't get arrested. And then I did that demo thing, and he was aware of me, and a year went by, and he was doing the music. He dabbled for a minute in doing some movie stuff, and there was like a movie called One Good Cop or something. It was like a Michael Keaton movie, and David was doing the music for it, and he was putting together a session at the last minute to cut this tune. And it was like, hey, remember that guy Michael Thompson? Oh yeah, call him. And so we did that, and then I'd like to say that the next thing I did with him was Celine, Power of Love. And that was like huge, although I think I had worked with him a couple of other times, but it was sort of like working up to that big, first giant hit that sort of cemented my sound with his production, with his 90s production thing, because he had his whole 80s Chicago, that sound, that thing. And then the Celine thing was great because that Power of Love tune had multiple guitar parts, and I really got to do some stuff on that tune where you could actually hear the guitar, and it's funny that the mix that ended up being what we all heard on the radio was supposedly just going to be a rough mix that the engineer Humberto Gatica, we call him Hum, he was the engineer on the session, and Celine was there with Renee, and at the session, and everyone was jazzed, but there was just kind of a basic track that David had laid down with this guy, this English guy named Simon Franklin, he had a synclav, and he was really great at putting together tracks, and he was pretty much the 90s. He was the other guy on all those songs. It was just Simon doing the sounds and stuff, David doing the parts on the synclav, and me on most of those records. It's just 3-man band.
Wow.
Actually. Yeah, so they had and the way it would go is David and Simon would put down a track, and then the next day I would come in and we'd do like a 3-hour guitar session, and he'd do vocals, and then it was like ready to mix. But the Power of Love thing was a special session because they were there and everyone was jazzed, and Hum did this mix at the end of the session. Fortunately, Celine had her like finished vocals on the track. A lot of the time, you know, at the point where you're playing on a tune, it's still a scratch vocal or something. But she had like the polished, great vocals on it. So he took like 20 minutes and did this mix.
20 minutes.
And I had just played the stuff, so everyone was high on the guitar parts, and so, you know, they were up in the mix maybe more than it would have been for the final mix kind of thing, and I had done that, like, you know, that whammy swoop into the last chorus or whatever it was, and so he had that up kind of loud and stuff, and he made a DAT of that mix for Celine and gave it to her, which she took away from that session. And then David, he ended up putting like bells and whistles and other stuff that they didn't dig on it, like strings or something like that, and Celine and her husband just really loved that first mix that Hum did. And so their story that they've told a bunch is that at one point they lost that DAT and couldn't find it anywhere, and it turned out it was in the pocket of a jacket or something like that. But they told that story a bunch. But that ended up being the record, that mix.
And when that came out, and you being one of the players on it, how much did that open doors?
That was pretty good, because it was like, you know, my whole goal from when I loved the records in the 60s that I was learning the parts from and stuff was to ever like come up with like guitar parts that you could actually hear them on the record, on the radio and stuff. And, you know, it was different back when with those Steve Cropper licks that, you know, started the tune or whatever.
Yeah.
You couldn't mistake them. But so to actually play, because in the 90s, you know, it became more a background thing, or, I mean, my sort of style that I found worked on a lot of songs was to kind of float in there and meld with the synths and stuff in a way that, like, it's not a synth, but it's a guitar, and so that makes it kind of cool. And I mean, I didn't consciously go, oh, I'm going to do that, and that's going to make me, you know, that's going to be attractive for, you know, this kind of music and stuff. But that was kind of a style that sort of developed along the way and stuff. But anyway, that tune, I remember, like, I started working with David after that pretty much, like, you know, every week or every other week, and the songs, most of them ended up being hits. You know, it was the Machine was like a Diane Warren song with David producing it.
Yeah,
with a hit artist, you know.
That combination in the 90s is going to be a hit.
Yeah, so that became a thing, and I was right there, and so there was kind of a stream of hits. But I remember after Power of Love, when it was, because it was like, yeah, it was number one for 11 weeks, you know, and the producer Peter Asher, like, I got up to David's and he said, oh, Peter Asher just called. He said he wanted to know who played guitar on Power of Love. And I was like, wow, he noticed. And I ended up working with Peter on a couple of albums and stuff. But it was cool, like, wow, this big producer guy is asking David Foster who played guitar on that song. I was like, you know, to me, I every little thing like that or big thing like that has just, I've been so jazzed over, because, you know, it took so long to get to that point. It was always such a dream, and it was always such a thrill for me to you know, so when you're actually creating stuff that people are hearing and noticing and stuff, it was quite a thrill. I never got blasé about that, for sure.
Yeah. The call to work with Madonna, how did that come together?
That was just another session. With David. He had written a tune with her, this song called You'll See, that was sort of a minor hit for her. It was, you know, nice little tune. But I gotta say, and I respect Madonna, and one thing that you can definitely say about her is that she has something to do with every note that goes down on one of her records. But we did not hit it off at all, man. She was a pain in the ass, man. It was like, it was a mercifully short session, but I'll never forget. It was at her. She had a studio called Brooklyn that it was, you know, it wasn't just for her project. She was one of the owners, and I had worked there and stuff, but it was kind of a small control room, and I had all my gear in there, and usually a lot of the time the artist wasn't even there for a lot of the sessions. Like I said, you know, Power of Love, Celine was there, and a lot of them they were, but a lot of them they weren't. But when I showed up for the Madonna thing, she was there, and there was like a couch right behind me because it was kind of cramped with all my gear in there and stuff. And so I didn't even get my usual chance to play down the tune, you know, and feel my way around, start working with David and come up with, you know, the initial part or whatever. And she was like sitting like 2 feet behind me, commentating on every note I played, like not in a great way. Like,
Yeah.
oh no, I don't like that. Oh, that's okay. No, tell him not to do, you know, like what? And so, you know, I just had to survive it. But she was not. Oh, I remember that, you know, we had done a part, and actually on the record, this tremolo guitar that I did, she liked that, so you can hear that. There's like a couple of spots on the record you can even hear the guitar, but a lot of tunes we had used this EBO thing that David really liked the sound. Of course, I liked the sound, and so David said, "Hey man, why don't we put an EBO on the intro?" And like before I'd even taken it out, she said, "I don't think I'm going to like this."
Little negative.
Really negative.
Yeah.
And so, like she said, I don't think I'm going to like this, so I get it out and getting the sound up. There's certain patch, reverb kind of thing I put on it and stuff, and I really don't think I'm going to like this, you know, and so I play the first note, and it sounds beautiful, and she goes, I hate it, you know, and like, it was like that. I went, man, that's not fun. So my one Madonna experience was not good just because she wasn't fun in the studio, and I don't dig that sort of super controlling thing where you're not even like open to hearing stuff. But I could be totally wrong about it, but the one thing I did walk away feeling is like, man, no one can say she doesn't, you know, produce her records or have a say in what every single note that goes down. I mean, she is like, so I do have the respect, and she's made great records and stuff. So anyway, it's on my resume, but it wasn't one of those fun ones at all. I mean, and I consider damn near every record and stuff was a great experience, and that was too. I was glad to be able to put it on my thing.
And then what about the Michael Jackson record then? Same year?
That was really cool. I flew to New York to do that. Michael had like, I think he had like 5 studios going in New York City working on that record.
Yeah.
And he had different producers working on different songs, and he would just sort of go from one studio to another. And
oh, amazing.
So they shipped my gear back there, and we were at Sony, and so that we worked it out. So I did one session like on a Friday with David at the Hit Factory, not for Michael's album. I think it was for Lisa Stansfield, or something like that. And so we did that session, and then they like wheeled my stuff just down the street, out on the street. I helped wheel it, like my rack and my stuff, down to Sony Studios, which Michael had one of those studios going. And so the next day we did the Earth song there, and you know, I dug the tune right off the bat. And so they had the lighting really low in the studio, and we're working on the tune for an hour or so, and I'm doing a part, and I sort of am looking down, and I realized that like Michael's come and sat down right next to me while I was playing, and you know, shook his hand. He didn't have the glove on. He was real nice. Again, the EBO, I ended up doing an EBO part, and he was like really fascinated with how it worked, and so I was showing him, you know, how the EBO worked. It's like a little magnetic thing that gets the string vibrating, sounds kind of fluty and stuff. But yeah, so we did some parts on that a couple of guitar players have had to learn those. I mean, there's actually only, I mean, there's more guitar on that record than you end up hearing. Like on the whole out, there's power chords and stuff that they're kind of in the mix. But you know, there's like originally they wanted Eric Clapton to play on that, and he was either on tour or busy or something. So those couple of blues licks in the middle of the tune were supposed to be Clapton-esque, kind of, you know. So, yeah, but another great, you know, one of those songs that I'm really happy to have a little part of and to have it on my list of tunes I play on. You know.
It's always interesting with Michael Jackson because it was always such a difference between the live band and who played in the studio. Like I've talked to Jennifer Batten, and she did I think 3 world tours. I don't think she played a note on a record. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's interesting to get your side of it.
Right. You know, and then David Williams did play on all the records, and he did the tours too. And yeah, everyone in that band made different money. They would pay David Williams like a ton of money, and then some people would be making far less. And yeah, but yeah, I've had a couple of friends that have done the gig that went, "Oh, you played on that song?" I had to learn those. Had to learn your parts.
I think around that same time you'd work with Quincy Jones. That's kind of sounds like an interesting project because, again, it sounds like you did a lot more than just come in to play a session.
Well, yeah, that was, I guess it was around, I mean, it was a couple of years later or something, but another, of course, icon that I just, you know, dreamed of someday getting to work with, Quincy. He wasn't really doing that many records, and he had his guys that he used, you know, and I really thought I wasn't going to get an opportunity to work with him. And then he did that Juke Joint album, and I had a couple of people plugging for me that recommended me. One was David Foster, and then one was Greg Fillinganes, who that I think when Quincy finally called me, Greg was sitting there, and there were a couple of, that guy Simon Franklin, that Synclav guy, he was working on the record too, and they were doing some tune, and they're saying, like, you know what the song needs is Michael Thompson, and so Quincy actually called the house, and of course I was flabbergasted that it was him on the phone, and so I went in to play on one song initially, and he really liked it, so he put up 2 more, or I think I ended up playing on 4 songs or something, all in the same night. It was one long night, and man, you know, he could hang. I remember it was 4 a.m, and I was just sort of finishing up the last thing, and he was just laughing and telling stories, and it was the great Quincy experience, but it ended up being just that one night.
Wow.
That was like the tail end of the record, and he kind of, like I said, he worked out great on one song, and then he said, hey, put up that Phil Collins song or whatever, you know, and I'd do, you know, part on that, and then this other song, Is It Love That We're Missing, I did a little solo, just a stupid little 8-bar solo or something on that, and because I played a solo, he made me a special guest.
Ah.
So, and he had an artist do a picture of me, like a great drawing, and they sent me like a plaque that had the drawing, you know, the picture, and, you know, love from Quincy kind of thing.
Cool.
That's up in my studio. It's really cool. But yeah, he's definitely coming from the school of, like, if you do a solo, you're, you know, that elevates you to being like a guest artist, you know.
And there's so many sessions throughout the 90s. Like, it just seems like it was one after the next. Like, you basically lived in the studio.
Yeah, it's kind of, like, amazing to me now, looking at, I mean, after, with the demise of the record biz and just work in general, just being so far down from what it used to be, that it was actually so busy, you know, not just for me, but it was busy. There was a thriving, budgets and, but it was great. Yeah, but for me, it was just, I would do these streaks of like, I saved all my date books from those years, and if you looked in them, it was like, I remember once it was like 28 days straight, and then I had like 4 days where I was like off and freaking out that I would never work again or something like that. And then like 10 days straight. I mean, there was that much work. It's like, whew, come back.
A big one for you would have been working with Mutt Lange as well, if you were a big Def Leppard fan when you were younger.
Huge. That, in my career, if I had my like one choice of like, okay, and this was the absolute shit, even though I was a fan of David Foster's productions and stuff, I ended up being a big part of his, records and stuff. The guy I really idolized as a producer was Mutt Lange from way, way back, And so to get the call from him and then end up doing like, I think I played on like 18 songs. I did like, 17 days or something with him on that Shania album. I did a week in Italy because I was going to Italy. I've done a lot of albums over the years with Italian artists, and they fly me over there and I do a record and stuff. And when Mutt called me, he was kind of under the gun and needed the stuff, and I said, well, I'm leaving for Italy next week, and he said, well, I'll come to you. And so I did this guy Adriano Celentano's album, and then right after that, the Mutt they booked like just kind of this shitty little studio, not a shitty studio, but like a 70s old studio or whatever in Milan, and he was in Switzerland, so they actually took the train there, and Shania was out like shopping and stuff. But so we did a week there. On the first, it was basically a super long day per song. Like we do one song a day, and we started at 11 in the morning and went till 3 a.m. on the same song. Then I remember that was like the first day, right? And then we're out on the sidewalk in front of the studio, 3 a.m., just me and him and the engineer. And he said, right, so what time in the morning? And I said, oh man, how about 11? He said, okay, and the engineer pulled me aside. He said, thank you, man. If you had left it up to him, he would have said like 9
yeah.
or 8 or something like that. I mean, he's one of those guys that he said he's existed on 4 hours sleep a night for. I mean, I don't know if when he's not working on something if he still does that, but he said that for 20 years he'd only been, get like 4 hours sleep a night or something. But so that's how it went, and I was of course thrilled to be working that hard with Mutt Lange. I mean, I'd heard about that, the kind of hours, grueling, thing. I mean, he makes it great because he's not like busting your ass or anything. He's trying to get that great performance. That's his whole thing. Is like, he's not looking for you to play it correctly. He's looking for you to play this part that has what he calls the grease on it. And so, you might spend an hour on the verse part, and like, they would have Pro Tools is so perfect for him because I said, how did you do it before Pro Tools, like with the Def Leppard records and stuff? And he said, man, we'd be sitting in the studio with a big, giant loop of tape and like a scissors and stuff, and but yeah, he would do it like he would say I'd be doing the verse to a tune, and I'd be playing the part, and they would have it in loop record where it would just keep recording me and let it go for, it seemed like 5 minutes or something, but a few minutes or something. And so there'd be all this stuff that I played, and he would remember that, like, 11 times back you had a great chicka, and then you had a great brang, and so he would take like 15 minutes and put this comp together of like the best stuff you did.
Mm.
And then sometimes put another comp together and make like a double of it off the thing, and then you would move on. Then you'd move on to like the B section, and you'd play that for a while and work on that. And then you'd get to the chorus, and then you'd do the thing. And so it was very deliberate and even, but it took forever, man. I mean, my butt was killing me so bad. I mean, like I said, it was working with Mutt Lange, so I was thrilled, but it was just, the hours were intense.
And it's working with Mutt Lange not for a day session, but for, a couple weeks of solid time.
Yeah, it was like we did that week, and then I think we got like 7 tunes or one song. I think it was 6 days or something like that. And then I was supposed to go back to do the rest of it after he went to Compass Point in the Bahamas, because he was really down on actually entering the United States at that point. And because he had some trouble with this, he had a studio in upstate New York, and there was a bunch of like the townspeople they like ran him out of town or something. But anyway, so he was really down on actually working. Like, he wasn't into coming to L.A. to work or something. So he worked with the Nashville musicians at this studio called Compass Point in Nassau in the Bahamas. That I'd worked there a couple other times. And so after Compass Point, so he had all those guys that had done her previous records and stuff from Nashville. They would come to studio and Compass Point, and like he'd have like 3 fiddle players, and he had like Brent Mason, the guitar player, and then he had like Paul Lime, or 4 or 5 mandolin player or whatever, and he'd have guys like hanging, and then he'd go, okay, great, let's do 2 hours of guitars or something. And so at 1 a.m. or whatever, and so that's how their thing went. But my thing was like me, myself, and I for 15 hours or however many hours that was, and so that was you had to keep it up for the whole time, which is great. I mean, I thrived on it because I was loving it, and it was working. So anyway, he did the Compass Point thing, and he gave me a call like when he was done with the Nashville guys, and he hadn't sat back and listened to all the tracks and assessed what he had really. And he said, I know we talked about you coming to Switzerland, but I think I'm good. I think I'm covered. And I went, oh, okay, great, man. I was a little disappointed that I wasn't going to get a chance to play on any more stuff. But then he got back to Switzerland and listened to all the stuff and listened to the tracks I had done and listened to the tunes I hadn't done, and which was super flattering. But I remember coming home and there were like 2 messages on my machine, like one was more desperate than the other one, like saying, I don't know what I was thinking, I've got to have you on the rest of these songs. I mean, it was like fantastic. So I left the next week to go to Switzerland, and I think I was there for 10 days, and he had a he was actually mixing. He had a proper control room where Mike Shipley was mixing the album in one room, but it was like an old schoolhouse, and so I was just in a room that they had a Pro Tools thing set up. It wasn't a studio, and Mutt was going back and forth between listening to the mixes and me working on the tunes. So it was pretty close to the end of the project, but yeah, I think I ended up playing on another like 10 tunes or something, but so that was cool.
And what's great about that as well is that there's always a ton of guitar in a Shania record, and it's nice and high in the mix.
I know, and to make all those parts work, it's kind of like when I hear those, I still have that album on my iPod and stuff, and it really, I'm a fan of what I did with Mutt, just the way he has the vision for the whole thing, and a lot of the parts were sort of his that I embellished on, and then after we worked together, when he got a little more familiar with me, I started like doing my usual kind of like, hey, how about this, or that kind of thing, and so I was able to contribute. But I had always suspected that he did a bunch of the guitars on the thing, and he never credited himself, and I was right about that. He had a bunch of guitars that he had played on the record that are kind of like the basic, background parts, but good parts, and yeah, he had spent a bunch of time doing those,
So he had you for 27 days or something, and he still had to do more himself.
Well, he had done that in advance.
I got you.
And I remember when I heard, because they'd have the parts up, and I'd go, man, that's a great part or whatever. I said, how come you just don't play all the parts? And he said, I ain't got the grease like you, mate. And so anyway, that was a great experience, And then he called me a couple other times, not to work, but just out of the blue a couple of times after that. I mean, that was like 2003 or 4 or something, and he, was cool. He yeah. But I haven't heard from him in a long time, but I've worked with Bryan Adams and Michael Bolton, who both did a bunch of stuff with Mutt, and they talk about him, and Bryan talks to him pretty regularly and stuff, and so we'd always. It was cool because after I worked with Mutt, I had sort of this stamp of approval, like, wow, he worked with Mutt Lange kind of thing, which there aren't a lot of people that can say that,
You've worked with so many producers. Is there anybody left that you wish you could have worked with, or wish you hope to work with?
You know what? I without sounding too jaded on the whole thing, it's like, no. I'm really glad that I got a chance to get the kind of catch the tail end of the golden age of recording. Someone put it like that, and I went, yeah, that's really true. I mean, if you start back in the Wrecking Crew days and stuff, it's like I got to have my own version of that. But no, I don't. I mean, I would just like to work more. I wish there was more work. There just isn't enough work, There isn't. There's too many good guys. There's too many veteran guys around that just. I mean, it's. I don't think anyone's doing. There's a couple of like movie guys and stuff that work a lot, but for what I did, which was a very specialized, and it wasn't. I got to work with a bunch of different producers, but it was really only a couple of guys. Like Babyface started using me, after I'd been working with David for a few years, and he was the hottest thing, and so he was using me on everything. And between him and David, and and then the other stuff you get called for, that was a lot of work right there, and so it wasn't like, wow, I have all these accounts, and everyone stayed busy and stuff. I mean, there's probably some other guys that had, there's another guitar player, Tim Pierce, that, he always played on a bunch of stuff, but like he was Rob Cavallo's guy, and Rob would use him on like every project he did, even if it was, the Goo Goo Dolls or these different bands. Tim would be like on the sessions, tracking and doing parts, and that was a lot of work, and I think for him that continued, and it probably continues to this day. But for me, man, I'm not trying to paint such a gloomy picture, because I've gotten to I still get to call myself a professional musician, and I keep this boat afloat by being a musician, and 95% of what I do is out of my little studio. As far as like going out to other studios and tracking, I never thought I would see the day, but months go by, and then I'll do a project or something where I have to go out to a studio, and I'm actually playing with other humans and seeing the cats and stuff, and I've savored it because it's like, man, you don't know how often that's going to happen, and I just never thought I would see that day. But it's just in general, work comes and goes, but and thank God for the little accounts I have, and then I do live some shows with David Foster, and those are more like the thing that pays money and stuff. And then there's a bunch of, everyone's making their music and cutting their tunes, and you do deals for people. It's not the big bucks on everything and stuff. And it's like, bless these people for thinking of you, first of all, and for, being willing to pay good money because they feel that you bring that much to their tune that they got to have you and stuff. But it's just, in general, it's just, man, it's just a shadow of what it used to be.
Where do you see it going then? Is it just going to get worse, or is something going to happen to turn it around?
It's weird because like back when there was the brouhaha about, Napster and Lars Ulrich and the Metallica are up in arms about the downloading, and I was like cranking away and super busy. I'm like, yeah, that's a drag, whatever. And sure enough, it makes sense. It's like millions of people buying CDs at $16 a pop equals millions and millions of dollars, which equals big budgets, which equals being able to pay me triple scale. You take that away, and there you have it, man. It's free music, and I'm not wanting to sound like one of these codgers, like, it's all free music, but it basically is. And so getting paid real money for doing records has become, the trick,
Things have changed, and you said you've brought it now into your home studio, which is a complete shift. And is that something that is done out of necessity, or is that something that you really do enjoy?
No, it's I got on board with the home studio thing way early on, like when ADATs came out in the early 90s. I always had, because I wanted to do my own recordings and stuff too, and then it became this great option for people that, people started sending me tracks. Some of them I didn't actually ever even meet in person for years. There's a couple of people out of Chicago that, and then that became, I think initially it was like the actual tape, and then the ADAT tape, and then it became files and I'd have to go to FedEx and send them the DVD or whatever it was that had my tracks on it, and then it became just you send it, hightail or whatever, and so that has kind of kept pace all along. As far as it used to be, a tune here and there that I would do, and then it started to be like I was doing certain tracks for real records here, and then like Babyface would need something for a tune, and he'd have me do something, or David would come by and we'd do a tune here, and so it kind of like, along the way it was like a legitimate place to also do my guitars, and then it went from that to being like almost the only option, unless someone's at a studio and they're tracking a record with a band, the drums and stuff like that. But as far as going to a Hollywood studio or one of these expensive studios to do guitar overdubs, it just made so much more sense to just do it here, but I have all my stuff. It's just a little room, but it accommodates me, and a lot of the time it's just me kind of producing myself, and with people that I've been doing stuff for years, they know sort of the level of what I'm going to give them, and it's a nice trust thing. But I have like Michael Bolton was here a couple of months ago, and his last like 3 records we've done, the work that I've done on them, we've done exclusively in my studio, and it's actually been really cool with him, because it went from him being, and he's still a big star, but when we do sessions in the 90s and stuff, he'd have his entourage, and he'd show up at the studio, and he was a very kind of, the big star and everything, and it's gone from that to like the two of us laughing and telling stories and stuff, sitting in my studio. I mean, he's like a year older than me. He's from Connecticut, right across the water from where I grew up. We have very similar, growing up with playing in bands kind of thing. He's a huge star, and I'm not. But so it's been really cool to have that be the vibe. And when someone works here with me at my house, it's on my turf. And David was here a little while after that, and he came by, and they had sent the tune over like the day before, and I had most of the guitars done because I kind of could tell it was like for a Japanese artist that David was doing us a favor. I mean, he probably charged him a ton of money and stuff, but it was like a Journey kind of rock ballad sort of tune, and I had done acoustics and electrics and solo and stuff like that, and so David came by, and his assistant was with him, and it was kind of the reason he wanted to be here was they were making a video like for Japan, like the making of kind of thing. So he came by, and we got some good footage of him and I sitting and him pretending that he was producing me. But I had already done the track.
Awesome.
But I played along with it, looking like we were recording it.
Oh, brilliant.
So that was fun. But yeah, the home thing. It wasn't like I sort of out of the blue went, oh God, I got to get a home thing going because there aren't sessions. I like I said, I wanted it for my own records, and and my own project things I was working on, but it became a very great viable thing, especially because this cartage business of they have these companies in LA that bring your gear to the session and set it up for you, which is a great, I think only in LA. They have it in other cities, but it became like the thing here. And when I was super busy, the guys setting up my equipment my account was like $50,000 a year just to set up my stuff and move my gear, but because it was, and it's really expensive. I mean, it's up to like $400 or something. So that's like another $400 you have to tack on to, like, if you aren't going to work in my studio and you want me to be at an outside studio. So that's a big expense. And, it's two guys, and they're on the other side of town from me and stuff. So I don't know, but that's really expensive. So anyway.
Now, as we finish up, and you've been extremely generous with your time, I just want to quickly ask you about, you've done a few other solo records throughout the years.
Yeah. I did two quote-unquote solo albums. One was 97, and I think the other was 2005. 97 was called The World According to MT, and that was a fun thing. I had Bobby Womack. There was a great version of A Change Is Gonna Come on it, and mostly instrumental. And then the one in 2005 was just another. That one was all instrumental. But one of these days I hope to be moved to record another one. But it's a lot of work. And both of those albums, I was busy doing sessions and stuff during the time, so that first one took like 4 years to do, because I'd get like 2 songs done, then like a couple of months would go by, and I'd get another couple of tunes and that kind of thing. But yeah, that's good. I still like those records, and I think a lot of love went into them, and in fact, pretty much all of my recorded work, when I hear it back, whether it's that MTV album, the solos on it and stuff, it's like, I can really hear the hunger and the just wanting it to be great and stuff that's always been a part of me to this day, you know, and so there isn't any cringe-worthy stuff where you hear and you go, oh God, you know. So it's nice to feel that way about your work, you know.
That's it for this week. You can find me online at thedoubletop.com or on Facebook, on Twitter at thedoubletop. We'll see you next week. Thanks for listening.